data, including one particular datum that was wrong. They all said, all these highly knowledgeable people, that the new Hungarian constitution bans abortion. No, it doesn't. But they clearly got this material from, I don't know, but from the same source, which slipped in a mistaken proposition. It was never checked. Now, I don't know whether the institution of fact checker exists in Denmark. It used to be in the United States. It certainly doesn't in the British papers. So it seems to me that you can certainly make up a story saying, if that, then this, and then the third thing. But on the other hand, you may actually then be seriously distorting what the story is. Maybe there isn't a story.
Meg ugyanaz volt a köztársaságról.
Tessék?
Ugyanaz volt a köztársaságról, hogy kiírták az
az
államformáról.
Yes, it's so wonderful. Widely stated in British and the German press, as a result of the new constitution, Hungary would no longer be a republic. Would change the name from Republic of Hungary to Hungary. Line 3 says the form of state in Hungary is republic. So all you've got to do is to read as far as the third line. But maybe that's too much of an effort. You know, and that was, by the way, not in Hungarian, that was in English, so it was less of an excuse. So fair enough. Not everybody reads Hungarian, and you know, if you don't know Hungarian, it doesn't mean you won't go to heaven. Helps. I think you had a question.
No. No? Well, we get reports that freedom of press is limited with the new constitution. Journalists can be prosecuted and so on. But what are the facts then? What has happened?
Well, journalists can be prosecuted in any country under the libel laws. Can they not?
But what is the actual change?
Can you actually name me a single case of a journalist who's been prosecuted under this media law? The answer is not.
That's why I'm asking.
But there isn't one. You know, that's simply a what if kind of proposition. Hypothetically, journalists can be prosecuted. Well, maybe they can, maybe they can't. But they, you know, okay. Let me give you a slightly more concrete case. There's a very controversial right-wing journalist, Georges Bayer, whom I do know but not very well, who writes pretty outrageous things. And at various times he came very, very close to being open to prosecution of various charges. The media authority looked at it again and again and said, sorry, we can't touch him. It's all within freedom of speech. So in other words, you can't even shut up somebody who's skating at the edges of respectability. Nobody has been prosecuted under the media law. So what's it for? You might well ask, yes.
No, that's what I'm trying to find out. What has been changed in this?
In the media law?
No.
Well, I can't give you the full detail because it's, you know, I'm not a legal specialist. As far as I'm aware, there is a translation of the media law. It is, to some extent, it's a consolidation of all the various previous legislation that was around. It did set up a media authority that, yes, it included experts who were surmisedly centre-right. They weren't necessarily party people, but they weren't known for being left-wing people, so automatically there is an assumption, etc., that these are serving the interests of the government. It's not true. I think media authority has behaved with a fair degree of autonomy. There is expertise in Hungary, and expertise does, on occasion, indeed regularly, override party loyalty. It's nonsense to assume the opposite as is frequently done.
Going a bit away from the media law a bit, but over to your party in general, it's been portrayed as quite a right-wing party in European press, as I'm sure you know. And there was the case of Orban, again, this is the way it was portrayed in Western media, that he said something about maybe looking at another kind of democracy than the liberal one. And can you maybe give us your take on those issues?
Sure, yeah. I wasn't in Tushnad when he gave that speech, but I have watched it on video and I have read it. And I can't quote it to you word for word, but I'll bring it out, it's on my computer somewhere. Basically what he said was that we're building an illiberal state in which we respect all the basic fundamental rights. And illiberal, if you are willing to excuse the word, which I think I think it's a mistake, I've said it in public, or if I reproved me in public, but that's all right too. What he actually meant was hostile to neoliberalism. He implied it and intended it to apply to economic liberalism, not to social liberalism. So that's point number one. I think he is firmly convinced that the present liberal, neoliberal economic system is in serious trouble. He has said publicly, my presence and elsewhere, that he thinks that this crisis in Europe won't be over for many years, which means that following the precepts, following the instructions of the IMF, etc., the Troika, as Greece is trying very hard not to do, will not solve the problem. And if you do look at it purely an economic dimension, Hungary was in a more or less Greek state in 2010. Previous left-wing government had left behind an appalling situation. I mean, really the country was teetering on the edge of a precipice. What he did, Orban, was he went to Barroso, head of the Commission at the time, and said, look, do we really have to keep the 3%? Could we have a little more leeway? And Barroso said, no. So he said, okay, fine, then we will introduce a system which will allow us to come through this. We don't want money from the IMF because we know their conditions are unacceptable. So then he introduced a special taxes on the banks, a special taxes on telecoms, on financial bodies and so on and so forth. Howls and screams from all around the world, including here, that this is anti-democratic. Actually, this is not anti-democratic. And since that time, a number of other countries have started some things of this kind. So, in those terms, I think Orban is of the view that his strategy of making the financial institutions pay extra is no bad thing. There are other complicated structural things like the domestic capital accumulation is very weak for historical reasons, etc. But the finance industry hates this because it's a very, very bad precedent. Just think what would happen if every country in the world started to put taxes on banks and hedge funds. Terrible. You know, ecto-capitalism, wouldn't it? But any of you come across Piketty? The Piketty's yeah, well, you know, he's saying something analogous to this. I'm fairly sure that Orban hasn't read Piketty, although it's just out in Hungarian, but I have. So that I think is the illiberal, but it was widely interpreted as meaning illiberal in all senses. That's what he said. Farid Zakaria, who actually apparently coined this term, said he was absolutely horrified that somebody should actually want to put it into practice. But what does he know about Hungary?
And going up against the European Union, your party is a member of the Conservative group,
EPP,
but not the
Conservative group.
No, sorry,
EPP.
yeah, sorry, not the. But I mean, you are a bit skeptical towards the way the European Union is run, even though you're in a group of many non-skeptical parties.
I would describe myself as a moderate integrationist. That's to say, I think we still believe in European integration. We're outside the Eurogroup. We don't have an opt-out, so we will have to join eventually. And I myself, and I don't think I'm alone in this, see this fundamental difficulty that all the economic factors are pushing the European Union towards tighter integration, economic governance and so on, six-pack, two-pack, etc. The political dimension of it is pulling in the opposite direction. I think there's very little legitimacy for more integration. How do you resolve this? I don't know the answer any more than anybody else. If I did, I would be sitting where Jean-Claude Juncker is sitting. So I'm happy to say that's not me. So I think Orban's position is that, of course, our place is in Europe. I would add, maybe he would too, I don't know, is that what European integration has done is to have provided the best conflict resolution mechanism that Europe has ever had. I'm just old enough to remember the war. I can remember Budapest as a heap of smoking ruins. So I have a personal stake in this. From that particular perspective, we are there in the middle of Europe, exposed in all directions. So we want to have, we want to be within a system where actually we can resolve conflicts, problems, disputes with our neighbours, everybody, in a regularized fashion. I'm going to give you one concrete example. Hungary is downriver of each and every one of its neighbours except Serbia. So if there's water pollution upriver, we get it. On a bilateral basis, it's very difficult to do. In the year 2000, the Romanians poisoned the river Tisza with cyanide. It was dead. The Tisza was dead. Huge, probably 50 to 100 centimetre thick carpet of dead fish. Terrible. The Romanians said, us? Oh, good heavens, nothing to do with us at all. I think it's gone to The Hague, I don't know where it's gone to. By now, that is actually much more open to resolution within the European Union. So, in that sense, Hungary is committed to Europe, is committed to integration, on top of which, in this next financial framework, we're actually going to do very well in cohesion and structural funds. So, it's a bit of both. Where I think there are serious questions in the mind of my party is the drive towards integrate everything, which I think is not the case. I think the dividing line between member state competence and EU competence should be more clearly defined. So we'll see what happens on that. I work on this particular area, so don't get me started on it, because you'll be here till 5 in the afternoon. Maybe.
Professzor úr, átmennék a túloldalra.
Itt az ideje?
Nem, csak átmennék a túloldalra, hogy onnan is legyen.
Another angle.
All right, of course.
So, how are we doing for time? Oh, I think we can go on for a while, yeah? Yes. Any further questions?
Yeah, not to get you started, but can you name like one area then, which is where you clearly think that it should be more on a national level, not on an EU level, for instance?
I'm inclined to think that education, which is a member state competence, should stay that way. I'm not against Erasmus. I think it's not a bad system, but by and large, what is taught, how it's taught, how one teaches national history, that should be a member state competence. I really don't think that, it's theoretically possible to construct a European history which transcends all the member states, but I don't see a problem with teaching some of this. But at the end of the day, I think in each country people ought to know their own history from their own perspective. I don't think Hungarians know very much about the way in which the English bombarded Copenhagen during the Napoleonic Wars. I'm not sure that they need to. But then, what does the Battle of Mohács mean to you? So, we have very divergent histories in Europe. It's useful to know a lot about it, but you can't know everything. I just learned the other day that for every French school child, 1515 is one of these iconic dates. What's that? Well, it's the Battle of Marignan. Do you know about that? I didn't either. The King of France beat a Swiss army. And Marignan is now Marseille Airport. That's the only thing. That's what it meant to me. So what I'm saying is that there are areas which are best handled at the member state level. Higher education is clearly one of them. There are areas where there were bound to be overlaps. I'm prepared to accept that health and safety regulation should have an all-European food safety, for example.